This call is being recorded and will be uploaded to VPLC's YouTube channel later on this week or early next week. You'll also receive the link to the recording once it's published if you registered for the chat via email. Feel free to send me a message during today's conversation if you need help with anything, and I'll be in the background during the chat. Yes, you will all be YouTube stars. And yeah, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to also share those in the chat. And I think that's enough for me. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and turn it over to Jay to get things started. Jay, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about crossover and the General Assembly.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining us. You never, on these chats, you know, you always have very different knowledge levels. Some people know a lot about the General Assembly and others don't. So I'll try to address that as best I can. So this is the crossover update. I'm sure most of you already know, but this is, as they say, crosses over, meaning that the House had to finish all its bills yesterday, and the Senate had to finish all their bills, which led to very long days on Monday and Tuesday. The Senate finished last night at 8 p.m. And I think anybody who was watching would probably agree they were getting a bit cranky. So from here on out, the House will be considering Senate bills and Senate considering House bills. And that leads to sort of a new level of frustration, confusion, whatever, because, you know, the House members have to come over to the Senate committees and vice versa. And so they're also in their own committees at the same time. So there's it can be a real problem trying to get people into the committees to hear the bills and the patrons there and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is give you a very quick update of things that we've been working on, with a heavy emphasis on those things that are still alive. This is definitely not everything we were working on, but I just tried to pick out a little bit from each area. So if you'd go to the next slide, please. This is just a general slide about how you can take action and how you can help us. We do action alerts if you're on our email website. On our email list, and you can get these action alerts from time to time. And as I always say, you'd be surprised at how often just a little bit of citizen input can make a big difference on some of these bills, because they, for the most part, don't hear from anybody on the vast majority of bills. So that's why we encourage people to get involved if you have, and we try to make it easy so you don't have to spend a lot of time doing it. Next, please. So I put this in here because we also are, at the same time that the bills are being considered, there's also the budget process. Our friends at Commonwealth, the Commonwealth Institute produced this. I thought it was a nice little visualization of how the budget process works. By the way, the Commonwealth Institute also has, once the budgets come out, and they'll do a great analysis, side-by-side analysis of the Senate budget and the House budget. And so this is the process. And right now we're at number 5 here. The money committees propose their budgets on Sunday. Some people refer to that as Budget Sunday. And then so number 6 will be House and Senate vote on their own money committees proposals, which I believe is on Thursday. Oh, great. Thanks, Ashley. And then each chamber votes on the other proposal passed by the other. So the House will reject the Senate and the Senate will reject the House. They always do that. And then they have a conference committee, usually about 8 to 10 people, 4 or 5 from each side, and they will then meet in secret. And when they reach a decision, when they reach a compromise, then each side will vote on it. And then it's still not done, because then it goes to the governor, and the governor tends to make a lot of changes as well. And that will be in the reconvene session, which I'm not sure. I think it's in April this year. Well, it's usually in April. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So under the heading of consumer rights, there were a bunch of towing bills this year. Towing has become a kind of a big issue. Not so much because, I mean, nobody likes to be towed when you park somewhere, which you shouldn't have parked, but there's a lot of towing going on that's really unnecessary. Some people refer to it as predatory towing. It's basically when you park somewhere, maybe you didn't see the sign, and maybe you were trespassing, but you're not really causing any kind of a problem for anybody. But these tow companies have contracts with the folks who own the lot, and they're just roaming around looking for people to tow. And so there's a lot of towing going on that really isn't necessary at all. And then the other problem is that sometimes you can't, with our clients particularly, you can't get your stuff back. We've had a lot of clients who've had like their kids' prescriptions in the car or their cell phones or whatever it might be, and then you can't get the stuff back. And so there was some bills about a bill about that. It looks like most of these bills are likely headed to a study of the towing industry. So next slide, please. Under affordable energy, VPLC was very active in trying to get some protections in place for consumers who are struggling to pay their bills. Some protections regarding, getting utility shutoffs in the middle of a cold weather in the winter, or people who have medical need to have their power on, that sort of thing. Most of these bills were defeated. Senator Edwards still has a bill in play. Virginia is only one of 7 states without winter or emergency shutoff protection. It's kind of frustrating. I mean, there's so much attention given to protecting wealthy investors at Dominion, but there's very little attention given to struggling consumers who can't pay their bills. And as that last sentence says there, it's obviously a big problem that the social services hotline received 50,000 calls from households at risk of losing their power, gas, or water last year. Next. College student transcripts. This is an issue we took on last year. Last year, we did not get a bill passed, but we did get a budget amendment in last year's budget, which revealed that over 100,000 people owe a debt to a university. By the way, this is not a student loan debt. This is a debt owed to the university, typically due to some complicated reason why their loan or their grant didn't pay for a semester that they were in. I've had talked to a lot of people about this, and it's a very complicated, you get like halfway through the semester and then you find out that you didn't meet some sort of grant, or you didn't meet some sort of grant requirement. And so you lose your student loan and suddenly you owe thousands of dollars in tuition. And Senator Hashmi put in a bill last year and put another bill this year prohibiting universities from withholding transcripts from students. And this is just a particularly egregious way to try to collect this debt. They can already collect a debt just like any other creditor. They can sue somebody. And if you owe to a public university, they can withhold your tax refund. But we try to put a stop to this transcripts. A bill has passed through the Senate that prohibits this, but only if the student has entered into a payment plan to repay the debt. And the House budget also includes the same prohibition. So we're hopeful this is going to go through this year. Next, please. Earned wage access providers. This is something that sort of dropped in our lap. We did not propose any legislation on this. We were not looking at this industry. But one of these companies that provides this so-called service put in a bill, and I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot of different companies doing this, and they're doing it in different ways. Clearly, some of the ways that it's done are better than others. But one company tried to just sort of get out front and have put in a bill that legitimized their practice at the expense of the other companies. And so we've been pushing that this legislation not pass. If you watch one of these committee hearings, it's pretty clear that they do not understand, the legislators don't understand this industry, which is certainly understandable. So there really needs to be studied before any kind of legislation should be passed. And so we're at right now that the Senate has passed a bill for a study and the House has passed a bill to regulate the industry, which is a mistake. So we'll see what happens with that. Next. So housing, we had a lot of bills that we were working on to try to improve housing affordability, habitability, and stability. Unfortunately, a lot of bills have been defeated over on the House side. These are some of the bills that are still in play, and they're mostly from the two from the Senate. I think the Senator Hashby's bill about tenants recovering security deposits. Senator Barker's bill requiring all landlords to make their tenant screening policies and fees publicly available. I have a friend who has applied to three places and spent almost $250 just for application fees. It's crazy. And I see this, and then there's a budget amendment to increase the appropriation to the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. And then there's a money to direct Department of Housing and Community Development to conduct a statewide housing needs assessment.
So Jay, if I could jump in on the Housing Trust Fund. So that was not included in the House budget from what I saw. And in terms of the Senate, they put it on the list of 8. It's the number 3 priority. I don't really know what they expect to happen with the list of 8 that says, we'll fund this if there's enough money left over. So I'm not hopeful about the Housing Trust Fund. I don't know. Is there more housing, or there is one other, or are you going on? There is more housing. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Next slide. Next, you got, okay. Under the Delegate Boulevard, I believe this passed the House, clarified the process for the rapid refund of money paid to, this is basically somebody coming from out of state or something, it's not had a chance to, and is like rented something online and then gets there and finds out it's a wreck. Senator McClellan's bill and Senator Locke's bill give tenants more time to catch up on rent by extending the pay or quit period from 5 to 14 days. We consider this extremely important. We think this will keep a lot of people from being evicted if they were given more time to get another paycheck to catch up on the rent and then not have to go through the eviction process. And then finally, the House Bill 1702 about giving people notice about rent increases, which has been just a huge problem. Next slide. Okay, and then more housing stuff. There's a budget amendment, I think on the Senate side, a grant to nonprofit housing providers to allow them to purchase mobile home parks. We've spent several years now working closely with mobile home parks, which are just a great source, not only of low-income housing, but of really long-term communities where people really support each other. This is not nearly enough money that's put in this budget amendment, but this is at least a start.
Yeah, we're excited. If we can get this in the final budget, we're excited that this would be a brand new fund. And there have already been success stories of nonprofits being able to purchase failing parks and really doing wonderful things with them. One is right here in Chesterfield County, Bermuda Estates, which was purchased by the nonprofit Project Homes, and another is East End Mobile Home Park up in Manassas, which was purchased by Catholics for Housing. So this is really a great thing. It will be a great thing if this gets funded, and then we can work on adding funds to it to help support nonprofits acquire these parks. We can work on adding funds in the future.
Okay, and then the last thing I'll say on housing is the last bill there, Delegate Price's bill to try to curb mass evictions. We've really run into this. This is a huge problem with particularly out-of-state partnerships or equity firms buying properties and then doing these mass evictions. And it's become a huge problem. So let's move on. Next slide. And then, yeah, domestic and sexual violence. These two bills from the House and the Senate. It's, as it's explained there, you can get the General Assembly in 2010 allowed for 2-year protective orders to be extended, but they really didn't establish the process, and these two bills fix that. We, of course, work on a lot of other bills in this area too, but that's the one, those are the bills that are still alive that we're mentioning today. Next. Family and children, child welfare. We successfully advocated against House Bill 1493, which would have eviscerated best interests of the child. So when you have a custody dispute go to court, it's been the law for many, many years that the court is supposed to look at what's in the best interest of the child. And there's almost every single year somebody tries to tinker with that. This is my own personal opinion, but it always feels to me when I watch these hearings like parents seem to think they have some sort of right or ownership instead of, and they tend to forget that it's really what's most important is who the child, what's best for the child. And then this other bullet point, the bill to ensure parents do not unnecessarily get caught up in child protective service investigations when their children are alone for a reasonable period of time has passed the Senate. There's just been probably some overreaching by some child protective service workers that, they threaten to take kids away for what seems like silly things. Next. This was a big initiative of ours this year. If the state wants to take your children away, they have to pay for a lawyer for you to protect your rights. They're paid very little money. I think it's $120 if I'm not mistaken. And so we try to do something about. We've been trying to do something about that for a few years now. A bill from Senator Deeds passed to create a study to look at the system. And then a bill from Senator Edwards passed directing the Office of Children's Ombudsman, something that we, by the way, advocated for and got passed a couple of years ago, to continue a work group looking at pilot representation centers for parents in these matters, as well as issues relating to the system of guardians ad litem for children. Next. Health insurance. So for several years now, there's been a lot of bills to try to authorize junk health plans. Basically, when Affordable Care Act passed several years ago, it outlawed a lot of these health plans that people pay for that don't really provide any kind of coverage. And it's a waste of money for people. And so we've had to fight these bills authorizing these junk health plans for years. The next one is bill from House Bill 1640 and Senate Bill 1409, which have passed and are crossing over. It bans insurers from charging those under 65 more for Medigap policies than those over 65. So we think that's very important. And then Senate Bill 1327, which we also consider to be extremely important, passed the Senate. It directs Department of Medical Assistance Services to establish a program to cover all kids. In other words, these are kids who aren't already covered some other way that are falling through the gap. Next. Under public benefits, couple of bills, House Bill 2025 passed the House. Schools provide SNAP and free reduced school lunch information to families at the start of the year. And the next bill, schools to provide SNAP at certain school-wide events. So basically, these are just schools have to provide this information to people. The really important bill, House Bill 1967, was defeated in the subcommittee, which would have led to universal free school meals. Really unfortunate that the House didn't see fit to do that. Next. Unemployment benefits. So the legislation for unemployment overpayment waiver legislation, waiving overpayments to people without fault, died an early death, and so but we'll continue to work for that. There were a couple of bills on the House and the Senate side that would have shortened the window in which claimants and their employers have to appeal an unemployment decision. They would have shortened the appeal time from 30 days to 15 days. And in what I have to say is one of the strangest twists of logic to claim that this would help deal with the 95,000 appeal backlog that they have. And I guess they didn't want to say this, but I think what they meant was if fewer people were able to appeal, then they could deal with the backlog that way, but that doesn't make any sense. And if there's a link there on our slide where we suggest ways that they can deal with this backlog without taking away people's due process rights. And unfortunately, both of those bills failed. The governor does have in his budget much needed funding for VEC appeal staff and call center improvements. So that's good that that's going to be in the budget. And that's one of the things we've suggested, if you go to that link, but there's some other things they could do rather than taking away people's due process rights. Next. So under nursing home staffing, a bill did pass passed the House this year, but we think this standard is below recommendations, and there are numerous loopholes and delays on enactment that mean we do not support the bill, and we're working to improve that bill. Next. And then a couple of bills on guardianship passed the House, creates an obligation of the guardian to visit with an individual under guardianship 3 times a year, and then also creates notice requirements when guardian is going to restrict the person from visitation information on how to appeal that action in court. A couple of issues that have been talked about at the General Assembly for many years now with guardianship. Next. So these are the folks that we have lobbying for us on the different issues. And then next slide is a picture that Taja took after we meet every week, the folks who do the lobbying, and this is a picture of us after our meetings. And I think we're missing Sushila and Emily, if I'm not mistaken. And that's the top of my head in the back. So any questions? So in the chat, okay, the chat isn't working for me. Mara, are there any questions? Oh, here we are. No questions in there. So we got if you want to ask any questions about any of these areas, we do have some of my colleagues on here. If you want to get more clarification on anything I said, feel free to ask. All right. Nobody has any questions. Okay, I guess I covered it real well, right?
Okay, well, if no one has any questions, we can wrap up a little bit early today. Look out for a follow-up email soon. We'll include a link to the recording of the chat today and some other resources. Definitely, as always, feel free to get in touch if you have questions after. And Jay, it actually looks like there is a question.
Okay, what is it?
Dan asks, are there any resources for reading about mobile home parks and elevation from poverty?
Chrissy?
Off the top of my head, I can't direct you to a specific resource, but I would say, and I'm trying to remember what it's called now. I can find something, and I think it would be really good if we could actually post that on our website. I can tell you that the organization that we work with a lot is called the Manufactured Home the Manufactured Home Community Coalition of Virginia. They have their own website. One thing you can find on there is a report they did a number of years ago that talked about the need for improvements to Virginia's mobile home parks. But I think it's a great question, and I am going to find some resources to post both on our housing webpage and on the mobile home community webpage.
Great. Thank you for taking that, Jay and Christy. We have another question in the chat from Tony, who asks, do you still need help to get bills passed or rejected? And if so, how can we get involved?
Oh yeah, I'm sure we will. You know, the best way is to get on our email list. To go to our website, and then on our advocacy page, you can see how to get on our besides other information, you can see how to get on our email list if you're not already on there, and then you'll get action alerts. You know, we've done maybe 6 or 8 action alerts so far, and we don't really have the numbers of people that have responded, but clearly people, you know, will tell us they've responded, and we'll go over there and we'll hear from aides, or we'll hear from the legislators that they've been hearing about this particular bill. So it makes a difference.
One thing that I'll say too, and that I assume we're going to get out there, is a call to action once the budget conferees are announced, and there will be different things that we will need help with in terms of contacting the conferees and asking them to include things in the final budget. From the housing perspective, our top priority is going to be getting the teeny bit of money for the mobile home grant fund into the final budget, so we can use all the help we can get with that.
And there's other budget things that we're working on too.
I was gonna say just quickly there, and I see John has a question, but there is budget language in the both budgets about language access, state agencies access to language access services, and making sure they get and take that money. So we are working on that, and that covers so many different issue areas that we work on.
Thanks, Sheila.
I was wondering if when we can expect to hear something on TANF budget amendments. There's an increase 10%, and the partial sanctions and the income disregard.
Hey, John, I can answer that.
Okay.
The only thing that made it in was the TANF 10% increase in the Senate budget. The disregard was not in, and unfortunately the SNAP increase for seniors was also not included in either budget. But the 10% increase from Senator Favola is in the Senate side. So if they could get that in the House side too, that would be great.
To us, that's the most important one anyway. Thank you for that update. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, happy to keep talking about it and how we can work on it.
Is there anything we can do to help get it through?
I think once, as you're saying, once the conferees are announced and we know who's going to be working on that section of the budget, just reaching out to them and encouraging them to do it and get it in. I mean, I know, you know, the concern is always the TANF trust fund, because they like to use it for lots of other things sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's a good bit of money, but, you know, we do think it's super important. I know the VPLC has been working on it for many years, and sorry, I'm not the expert, Cassie is, but definitely, even if it doesn't go through, we'll keep pushing for sure.
Okay. Is Cassie well? Is she okay?
As far as I know, yes. We keep on yelling at her to not reply to emails.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah,
All
so
right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
no, go ahead. Go ahead, Mar.
I was just going to say that I don't see any more questions, and I think we just hit 9:30, so we're going to start wrapping up. But Jay, if you have any last thoughts that you want to share and get in there, please go ahead.
No, but get on our list and participate. It's important. You know, one thing somebody told me years ago was, I think I went to some kind of gathering and one of the state senators was speaking and he said, how many of you know who your legislators are? And, you know, a lot of people raised their hand. And then he said, well, how many of your legislators know you? And what he meant by that was it can really pay to get to know your legislators. And I don't mean right now, they're too busy to, to get to know you, but think about that during the off season, you know, if you have a chance to get to know your legislators and talk with them and about any particular issue or anything, it can go a long way towards helping that you develop that relationship, and then you contact them on certain bills, and it can make a big difference. But thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. What a perfect note to wrap on. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this morning. And thank you to Jay and all of our other VPLC advocates who were able to join the call this morning, for your time and for your knowledge. Like I said, we'll send a follow-up with more resources in the recording, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, thank you for being here, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.